So interesting. I was reading on the internet, which of course never lies, it's all true. But there was an interesting factoid which said that supposedly Lewis Carroll's classic book, Alice's Adventure in Wonderland, is the most quoted book in the world after the Bible. And I thought, wow, I mean, that's pretty amazing. But I mean, on the one hand, I guess if you think that, like, in a way, all, people all over the world, or at least people who speak English, will talk about going down the rabbit hole. So I'm not sure if they're talking about, actual, citations, or if they're talking about just ways that we've adopted these phrases from the books into our language, like down the rabbit hole, through the looking glass, the Cheshire cat grin, all those things. But, and also there are so many pop culture references, that Alice pops up in throughout, since the book's been written. Some of my favorites, which I'm not going to go all the way back to like the 20s when they first started to show up, but um, although I am actually, James Joyce wrote Finnegan's Wake. I forget what year he wrote that, but if you are at all familiar with James Joyce, he had this very stream of consciousness style of writing. And if you if you read his writing, it actually you could think, oh, this actually could come right out of Wonderland, or maybe go into Wonderland, because it's and he particularly drew from Carroll's scripts when he wrote that book, Finnegan's Wake. And he used a lot of puns and a lot of word plays. And so one quote that he has in there is, Alicious, twin streams, twine strains, through alluring glass, or alas, in Jumbo Land? Wonderlawn's lost us forever. Alias, alas, she broke the glass. Little locker, through the leafery. Ours is a mystery of pain. So it's completely nonsensical. I mean, you can kind of follow it wherever you want. You could let your imagination take it, but definitely inspired by Lewis Carroll's way of writing. Also, I did not realize this, but the Mad Hatter is also a Batman supervillain. I didn't know this, but he first appeared in 1948, apparently. So I don't know. He's at least in the comic book series. I don't know if he ever showed up in any movies, but of course, most of us are familiar with the song White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane. And the book, Go Ask Alice, which was originally attributed to Anonymous, but later it was found out that Beatrice Sparks was the actual author of that. And of course, both of those songs refer to the psychedelic movement, the psychedelic experimentation that was happening in the 1960s counterculture. If you think about Carroll's Wild Ride, the adventures, the potions that make you larger and smaller, and the hookah smoking caterpillar. I mean, that fits right in with the counterculture. TV series Lost, if you ever watched that, they made a numerous references to the book. If you ever saw the music video from the 1980s, Tom Petty, Don't Come Around Here No More. So that's a fun video where he's playing the Mad Hatter. And then, of course, the film The Matrix, Morpheus talks to Neo about what happens if he takes the red pill. And he says, the Matrix is everywhere. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. So all of these references, of course, are pointing to sort of altered states of consciousness. Finnegan's Wake is about a dream. White Rabbit and Go Ask Alice are referring to psychedelic experiences. And The Matrix is pointing to an illusory reality, a simulation. I'm not sure whether or not Lewis Carroll wrote this book to be about the kaleidoscopic nature of self and reality, but that is kind of what it is. I mean, that's what it turns out to be, And one of the famous scenes of the book, which I particularly love, is when Alice comes across the caterpillar smoking the hookah. I mean, it's hilarious. It's a hilarious image. And he asks, "Who are you?" And she says, "Well, I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least I know who I was when I got up this morning, and I think I must have changed several times since then." She tells him about how she can't remember things. She keeps changing. She recites a rhyme, but she does it incorrectly. It's very bewildering and puzzling. And they go back and forth about this. And at one point she says, "Well, you're going to turn into a chrysalis." And he was kind of like, "No, I'm not." And he just kept smoking his hookah, because he's kind of an example of a character who's just sort of blissfully unaware, perhaps, of his own shifting states of consciousness and just is happy to sit there smoking a hookah. Whereas Alice is going through all of these changes all at once, and it's very disorienting. It's forcing her to reassess reality. What is reality? So, and that points to our shifting experiences, the shifting experiences we have of ourselves and the outside world. And, if you ever have done any psychedelics, it offers a different reality way of seeing reality in ourselves that we could not have even fathomed the way we were, born into this little brain, right? They get us outside of our habitual ways of processing things. And so Alice herself takes a bit of a magic mushroom and she starts to grow and morph again. But she's learned enough, taking all these substances that she's learned how to titrate. So, she takes a little bit and she grows a little bit, and then she takes a little more and she grows smaller. And then, so she's learning to titrate the substances. Finally, she eats enough of the mushroom to where she gets down to a normal size. Now, I don't know if Lewis Carroll had any knowledge about the psychedelic properties of psilocybin. I don't know. I mean, if you read his book, you kind of think he must have been smoking something or drinking some funny tea. I don't know. But really, who knows? Who knows? But psilocybin, magic mushrooms, they've been in the news more these days, more recently. Microdosing has become a thing. It's being researched again in universities. They shut down the research in the 1970s and 80s and then, started the war on drugs and after the counterculture movement. And there are arguments as to why that happened. You could say maybe the establishment didn't like the fact that might be expanding their consciousness. I mean, that might be part of it. It could be that they thought that things were just getting out of control and becoming too chaotic. Whichever opinion you want to take. They shut down research. But it's having a resurgence now. The universities are now back to researching psilocybin and other psychedelics for their healing properties. But before we go down that particular rabbit hole of psychedelics, mushrooms themselves are really pretty miraculous. Did anyone see the film that came out in 2019 called Fantastic Fungi by any chance? No? Um, well, it really is amazing. I mean, like mushrooms had never been really popular in the sort of botany world, but there's been a lot more interest lately, not just because of psilocybin, but just in general in terms of like all the properties that mushrooms, magical properties they have. Mushrooms, it turns out, are really our original ancestors. They really set the stage for life to evolve on Earth. And the mycelium are the invisible parts of the mushrooms. They're really the telephone wires of nature's communication network. So through this network, plants and trees work with fungi in a very symbiotic relationship. Interesting fact, fungi it's not really a plant. It's this weird, they don't really know what it is. It could be sort of a cross between a plant and an animal because the mycelial network, as they've found out, has more connections than our brain's neural pathways. So it actually works a lot like our brains, using electrical impulses and electrolytes. So, there is this intelligence working through these networks, and it sort of, really opens up this question about like, well, what is intelligence and what is consciousness even? And mycelium are like they're everywhere, like the Matrix. Really, they are like everywhere. Like we breathe in spores when we're breathing in, and when we're walking, we're stepping on mycelium somewhere. They're literally everywhere. Another fascinating thing about the mycelial network is it's a shared economy where ecosystems flourish without greed. The network ensures that the neighbors all have the resources that they need. And they've also formed ways to distribute nutrients across the entire network. So no one goes hungry. These colonies even have their own biomass recycling programs. Mushrooms actually break down organic matter that is decaying, so all organic matter that has died, mushrooms do that decaying process. They're actually really a major part of the death rebirth process. So they help the decaying process and they also help the regenerative process. So they really are amazing. They're also how trees communicate with each other. So by sending electrical signals through the fungal network underground, trees can learn, remember, nurse one another, and even recognize their own kin. So these biologists have found out that when a seedling drops from a tree through the mycelial network, the tree can recognize that that's its child, and it starts to make the decision to send nutrients to that particular tree. So you know, it's not unlike us, right? So the mycelial network really has intelligence with decision-making ability and memory and learning. And like much of nature, we humans could stand to learn a lot from it. We could stand to maybe humble ourselves a bit and learn from these systems that are in existence. At some point in history, humans seem to get into their heads that, it's the intellectual capacity that makes us so great. And I would say that's a yes and a no, right? Because on the one hand, our intellectual capacities have led to these incredible inventions that we've come up from the wheel to the rocket ship and beyond, you know. Um, but for all the amazing things it's given us, it's also created a lot of problems for us that are really coming to a head in the 21st century. So the mycelial network has intelligence, and it may not be intelligence that when we think of intelligence, we think of intellectual intelligence, right? Which is more cognitive. But more and more biologists are learning about how mushrooms and other non-animal beings make decisions and learn and communicate. And more often than not, it happens in a way that is in service to the whole, right? There really is this reciprocity, this symbiotic relationship in nature between these parts of nature. So what we humans seem to have forgotten is that we are a part of this interconnected web of life. We're a part of it. We're not outside of it. We're not above it. We're not at the top of the food chain that we think we are. We sort of learn to see ourselves through this lens of intellect and ego as separate entities battling it out for survival on the planet. Now, again, intellect, no question, is an amazing tool, but it can also get in our way, individually, collectively. Ideological warfare was born out of the intellect. We keep looking to our intellect for the answer to the world's problems, and I'm not sure that it's there. We can argue about reality until we're blue in the face, with others, fellow humans. We can debate opinions about how the world should be run until the end of time and get nowhere. These are all opinions, and there may not be a right answer in there. Albert Einstein said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is its faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." So the ego intellect has really disconnected from this wisdom that he's talking about, this intuitive wisdom, which is, connected to the universal intelligence. It's kind of like the intelligence that just is, right? Internal, eternal wisdom, universal intelligence. We're a part of this magnificent web of life. We have access to its wisdom, to that deeper intelligence. When you look at nature, you see nature unfolds perfectly without intellectual thought. Stars are born, life evolves on a planet, seasons change, birds fly in formation. Embryos grow into fully fledged human beings. And all of that happens without an intellectual thought. And so, we humans have gotten into our heads that kind of intelligence, rational thought, is greater than all the other kinds of intelligence on the planet. And that's how things are playing out in society and politics. And really, that mentality is getting us into a world of trouble because we're making decisions out of our intellects and our egos. And these are decisions that are often not good for people or planet. So, what if we look to the wisdom of the mycelial network, which connects all living things on the planet? You know, and also love. Love is a force of nature. Like we didn't invent love, right? Love didn't come from us. Love is nature. Nature is love. And, love is something that grows, spreads, and nourishes, just like the mycelial network. I mean, I don't know if mushrooms feel love, but maybe they do, right? I mean, animals do. So maybe plants do too, just like the tree looking after her young. And, when people talk about walking in nature, they often describe a sense of peace or interconnectedness, love. So the more, we look to the wonder of nature with reverence and humility and learn from it, the more we can find the answers to our problems. And there are already movements, of course, many movements going on in that way. People are there's the biomimicry movement, as well as things like regenerative farming and a host of other things where people are looking back to nature. And of course, indigenous cultures never left nature, right? Like many of them are still have a very intimate relationship with the natural world and do live with in this sense of humility and respect. So the changes that need to happen in human consciousness, they may not happen at the level of government anytime soon because government is really stuck in this old paradigm of like anthropocentric, top-down mentality. Um, with sort of like a very specific economy, right? And not really thinking about this kind of shared economy. And so that paradigm is based in the illusion of separation as well. And we're duking it out in the forest, and it's every man for himself. But people and groups of people can start to shift the paradigm themselves. And that brings me back to the psychedelic mushroom. Um, so, psychedelic mushrooms have been used for thousands of years in spiritual and divinatory ceremonies. And like other psychedelic drugs, they trigger mystical experiences, or they can expanded consciousness. Um, there's a theory that it's a working theory that scientists, anthropologists have that one of the reasons that human beings went through there was a period during which their brains tripled in size, and it was a very short period of evolution, evolutionarily speaking, a very brief period of history where their brains literally tripled. And so the anthropologists have this theory that they learned they learned to eat these psychedelic mushrooms, and the mushrooms expanded their consciousness, and it really expanded their inventive capacities and their wisdom, and it really helped to grow the brain to the point where we started inventing tools and all these creative things that we came up with. It's a theory, but it's definitely an interesting one. And then also, thank goodness, research is being done again on psychedelics. And a lot of the research is really promising, right? So terminal cancer patients are given psilocybin, and afterwards they report like that some of them no longer have a fear of death, or they have this experience of just very drastically decreased levels of anxiety. There was also a study on mice in which the mice were trained to have a conditioned response, a fear response to a certain sound. And so every time the sound went off, they started to shake in fear. They gave these mice mushrooms, it completely went away. So the promise of that is that, where we are in our evolution is that we're oftentimes um, a lot of spending a lot of time in fear or stress, like anxiety, stress response, fear and paranoia about what's happening in the world. So if there's this ability to remove, literally overcome fear response. Now the fear response has a purpose, right? But we overuse it like to the nth degree. So, if you have more expansive experiences more of the time, there's a chance that we could sort of move past this kind of place that we're stuck in our evolution right now. So another interesting thing about this is that it's not the psychedelics, it's not the mushrooms that's helping people, that's giving people this experience, right? The mushrooms unlock something in the brain. It's something that already exists in our brain. We already have this capacity for these expanded states of consciousness, for these higher states of consciousness, but most people don't get there in their lifetime. Most people live somewhere between the reptile brain and the executive functioning, and there's kind of a communication between those two, which is why we sort of end up in these stories of, war, fear, and greed and enmity. It's like because the fear and the intellect are kind of working together to come up with these stories of like, well, I need to hoard my resources and I can't let him have more, and all that stuff. So the higher brain, which they've decided is located somewhere here, like around the crown chakra area. And it's also called the oneness area of the brain. That is what's unlocked by the psychedelic, drugs, but also, you know, states of meditation and trance and even art, seeing art or performing in art or watching a performance or walking in nature, or people describe that too, like when they're looking up at the stars, things like that, having that oneness experience where we're connected, we feel insignificant, but also connected and in awe and wonder. And so this is why people use psychedelics and use mushrooms specifically to have those experiences. And the movie, the Fantastic Fungi movie, one of the things they talked about was they said, maybe we actually need mushrooms to get us to the next level, to basically keep us from destroying ourselves. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know that we need mushrooms, but we do need more people to be in higher states of consciousness, whether that is through meditation, compassion practices, or other ways. Art is always a good one, but any of these ways that we can find that sense of oneness, interconnectedness, compassion, and love that is our true nature, that's within us all the time, except that we do get stuck up here in the stories, the not great stories of anxiety and greed and fear and all of those things. So, this is not I'm not advocating that you go out and do mushrooms. I wouldn't do that. But if you're curious, go do them. I'm not telling you not to do them. But again, it's really just more about sort of this whole the magic of the mushroom, whether it's a psychedelic mushroom or not, the mycelial network, this interconnectedness that we're all a part of, this intelligence of nature that we're all a part of. And yes, expanding our consciousness so we can get out of this really bad period of history that we're in, where, it's just all about, struggle and, hatred, and get to a place where everyone wants what's best for everyone. So next time you eat a mushroom, think about it. Not a magic one, just a regular mushroom. It's actually a very magical thing. Awesome, guys. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming. It's always a joy and a pleasure to have the tea party. The next tea party, I think, is going to be on July 15th, I'm pretty sure. So I hope to see you all there. So wonderful. Have a great day.